There is a mystery that many believers have ignored, and it is the mystery of the morning. The morning is not just the beginning of a day, it is a spiritual territory. Before emails are opened, before people speak to you, before situations confront you, the morning is already speaking. Come, the question is not whether the day will talk. The question is whose voice it will obey. Scripture reveals that the day has ears. Job asked a question that exposes a deep spiritual reality. Have you commanded the morning since your days began? This tells us that the morning is not automatic. If you don't command it, something else will. If you don't give it instructions, forces you cannot see will. Many believers wake up and rush into their day without realizing they are stepping into a script already written by darkness. Come, spiritual people don't start their day, they set their day. When you wake up in the morning, your spirit is most sensitive. Come, the noise of the world has not yet crowded your consciousness. This is why those who walk in dominion understand the power of early fellowship with God. Come, prayer in the morning is not a religious activity. It is a governmental exercise. You are not begging God. You are aligning with Him to legislate outcomes. The morning is a meeting point between heaven and earth. And whoever speaks with authority there determines the flow of the day. Words are not neutral, especially in the morning. When you speak early, your words enter the foundations of the day. This is why careless speech, complaints, fear, and anxiety in the morning can poison an entire day without you realizing it. Many people say, "Come, I don't know why today went wrong." But the issue is not the afternoon, it is the silence of the morning. Darkness thrives where light was not invited early enough. Come, to command your morning with God means you deliberately submit the day to divine order. You declare what will be permitted and what will not. You announce peace before trouble attempts to arise. Come, you release favor before resistance appears. This is not positive thinking. This is spiritual authority. When prayer is backed by understanding, it becomes enforcement, not hope. Fellowship in the morning also aligns your spirit. Before your mind begins to process pressure, before emotions react to circumstances, you allow God to tune your inner man. This alignment is what makes some people calm in chaos and stable in uncertainty. It is not because their lives are easier. It is because their mornings are consecrated. What defeats many believers during the day is not temptation. It is misalignment. Consistency is the key. Commanding the morning once is powerful, but commanding it daily builds a spiritual rhythm. Over time, your spirit becomes sharp. Come, you begin to sense things before they happen. You start walking ahead of situations instead of reacting to them. The day begins to cooperate with you because it recognizes a voice it has heard repeatedly. Come. When you command your morning with God, you are not trying to control life by yourself. You are acknowledging that without Him, the day is vulnerable. You are declaring that heaven must be involved before earth responds. This is how men and women rise above cycles, patterns, and invisible limitations. They don't fight the day when it is already mature. Come. They shape it while it is still forming. If you want to see change in your results, don't just adjust your activities, adjust your mornings. Because whoever owns the morning will eventually command the day. The morning is a spiritual gateway because it represents the point where the invisible authoring of a day is still fluid and undecided. Before events harden into experiences, before choices solidify into consequences, The early hours exist as a window where outcomes can be shaped. In the realm of the Spirit, time is not empty. Come, it carries potential, and the morning carries the highest level of it. This is why Scripture often associates beginnings with power, authority, and responsibility. What is done first carries weight because it influences everything that follows. Destiny is not only a long-term concept, it is expressed daily. Every day contributes a line to the story of a life. And the morning determines the tone of that line. When a person rises without awareness, they assume the day will naturally work in their favor. But spiritual laws do not operate on assumption. If destiny were automatic, prayer would be unnecessary. The fact that destinies can be delayed, diverted, or damaged proves that daily alignment matters. Come, the morning is the earliest point where direction can be given before resistance forms. Darkness understands this principle deeply. That is why many attacks on focus, discipline, and prayer target the early hours. Fatigue, distraction, laziness, and mental noise often appear strongest in the morning, not because the body is weak, but because the enemy knows the value of that moment. If the gateway is left unguarded, the day is easily infiltrated. Spiritual negligence at the beginning does not always show immediate consequences, but it quietly programs confusion, delay, and unnecessary battles later. To say the morning can be programmed is to acknowledge that days are not random. Thoughts, emotions, encounters, and decisions often follow patterns that were set earlier. When a person begins the day in fear, haste, or complaint, they unconsciously give those forces permission to dominate the remaining hours. On the other hand, when the morning is filled with divine consciousness, clarity, and authority, the day responds accordingly. This is not superstition, it is alignment with spiritual order. Programming the morning does not mean controlling every event, but it means establishing spiritual boundaries. Just as a constitution governs a nation even when problems arise, spiritual declarations and fellowship in the morning govern how challenges are handled. Problems may still appear, but they meet a prepared spirit instead of a confused one. Many believers struggle not because life is harder for them, but because they meet life unprepared daily. The gateway nature of the morning also lies in sensitivity. The human spirit is quieter before it absorbs the noise of the world. Social media, conversations, responsibilities, and pressure gradually dull spiritual perception as the day progresses. The morning offers a rare clarity where the voice of God is easier to discern and spiritual impressions are sharper. Ignoring this moment is like ignoring clear instructions and waiting until confusion sets in before asking for direction. When a person consistently engages God in the morning, they begin to notice a shift in how life responds to them. Favor seems to precede effort. Wisdom accompanies decisions, and discernment becomes more natural. This is not coincidence. It is the result of early alignment. Heaven is acknowledged before earth is confronted. The spiritual realm is consulted before human systems are engaged. Destiny responds to honor. And honoring God with the morning is a statement of priority. It declares that outcomes matter more than activity, and alignment matters more than speed. Many people are busy yet stagnant because they rush into motion without direction. The morning is where direction is received, strength is renewed, and authority is established. When this gateway is consistently claimed, days stop feeling accidental. Life becomes intentional, not because challenges disappear, but because they are no longer surprising. The believer begins to walk ahead of events internally, even if externally things appear uncertain. This inner advantage is what separates those who merely survive from those who advance steadily. Ignoring the morning does not always produce immediate failure, but it slowly weakens spiritual. Over time, prayer becomes reactive instead of proactive, faith becomes defensive instead of confident, and life feels like a series of responses rather than a journey of purpose. Understanding the morning as a spiritual gateway restores order, awareness, and dominion at the most foundational level of daily life. Every day responds to a voice because creation itself was designed to obey instruction. From the beginning, nothing moved until a word was spoken. Light did not appear because time passed. It appeared because a command was released. This principle did not expire with creation. It continues to govern life daily. A day is not an empty container waiting to be filled randomly. It is a responsive system that aligns itself to the strongest authority that speaks into it first. Silence in the morning is never neutral. Many people assume that if they say nothing, nothing happens. But in the spirit realm, silence is interpreted as permission. When a believer wakes up and allows the morning to pass without intentional spiritual engagement, that vacuum does not remain empty. Other voices, influences, and agendas rush in to take advantage of the unclaimed space. The day does not wait for awareness. It responds to availability. This is why chaos often feels unexplainable. The people say things like, "I don't know why today went this way," or "everything just felt off from the start." What they are experiencing is not randomness, but unchallenged programming. A day that is not instructed will default to disorder because the world system is already biased toward confusion, compression, and resistance. Without a superior voice, inferior forces dominate naturally. Every voice carries authority based on its source. Fear speaks, pressure speaks, past experiences speak, and even environments speak. When the believer does not speak deliberately, these voices step forward to lead the day. Anxiety begins to dictate decisions. Urgency replaces wisdom. Emotions begin to drive actions. The day becomes reactive instead of intentional, not because the person is weak, but because they were silent when authority was required. Commanding the day does not mean shouting words loudly. It means releasing spiritually aligned declarations with consciousness and faith. Authority is not volume, it is legitimacy. When a person speaks in alignment with God's will, their words carry weight beyond their natural strength. This is why two people can face similar days, they yet experience completely different outcomes. One allowed the day to speak to them, while the other spoke to the day. Silence also affects the mind. The first thoughts that dominate the morning often shape emotional posture. If the first voice heard is worry, the heart tightens. If it is fear, confidence weakens. If it is complaint, gratitude disappears. But when the first voice is prayer, worship, or divine truth, the inner man rises into leadership. The day then follows the spirit instead of dragging the soul behind circumstances. Chaos thrives where leadership is absent. In any system, when leadership withdraws, disorder increases. The same applies spiritually. The believer is meant to exercise spiritual leadership over their time, thoughts, and environment. When this leadership is not asserted early, the day becomes a battlefield instead of a mission field. Problems that could have been managed easily begin to feel overwhelming, not because they grew, but because authority was not established. The danger of habitual silence is that it slowly conditions a person to live defensively. Prayer becomes something done only after things go wrong instead of before anything begins. Faith becomes a reaction instead of a position. Over time, that this creates spiritual fatigue because the believer is always catching up instead of leading forward. The day feels heavy because it is already shaped by forces that were never confronted early. Understanding that everyday response to a voice restores responsibility without creating pressure. It reveals that life is not out of control, but it also shows that negligence has consequences. God does not override human silence automatically because authority was given to mankind to steward the earth. When that authority is not exercised, the system still functions, but without divine order. When a believer consistently speaks into their morning, they notice that resistance decreases, clarity increases, and decisions become easier. This does not mean challenges disappear, but they lose their power to confuse. The day recognizes a governing voice and adjusts accordingly. Peace begins to lead instead of panic. Wisdom leads instead of impulse, and strength replaces exhaustion. The tragedy is not that chaos exists, but that many believers unknowingly invite it through silence. Once this understanding settles, the morning is no longer treated casually. Speaking becomes intentional, prayer becomes strategic, and the day begins to align itself to purpose rather than pressure. Spiritual authority is not released simply because prayer is spoken. It is released when prayer is joined with understanding. Many people pray sincerely yet see little effect because sincerity without insight does not produce dominion. Authority flows from alignment with divine order, and understanding is what brings that alignment. When prayer is backed by understanding, it stops being a request made from weakness and becomes a declaration made from position. The early hours of the day amplify this reality because dawn represents transition. Night is handing over to day. Darkness is yielding to light, and systems are resetting. In moments of transition, authority matters more than effort. This is why the break of dawn is a powerful spiritual moment. Whoever understands how to engage God at that time does not just pray into the day. They step into leadership over it. The timing is not mystical, it is strategic. Spiritual systems are most responsive when cycles are shifting. Understanding gives structure to prayer. Without it, prayer can become emotional noise. A person may cry, shout, and repeat words, yet not touch authority because they do not know what they are enforcing. Authority is not about how long you pray, but about what you know while praying. When you understand God's nature, His will, and your position in Him, your words carry clarity. Clarity is dangerous to chaos because confusion is the environment where resistance thrives. At dawn, the mind is quieter and the spirit is more alert. This makes understanding easier to access. The distractions of the day have not yet crowded perception, so spiritual truths land deeper. When a believer uses this time to pray with understanding, they are not trying to convince God. They are aligning themselves with what God already intends to do. Alignment is what releases authority, because authority flows through order, not effort. Many believers struggle with prayer because they approach it as a transaction instead of a partnership. They ask God to do what He has already empowered them to enforce. Understanding corrects this imbalance. It reveals that prayer is not only communication, it is collaboration. At dawn, when this understanding is active, Come, prayer becomes legislation. You are not reacting to problems, you are setting conditions. Authority also increases when prayer is rooted in revelation rather than emotion. Emotions fluctuate, but understanding remains stable. When a believer understands who they are and what has been entrusted to them, their confidence is not dependent on how they feel that morning. They speak because they know, not because they feel. This is why their words carry weight, even when circumstances seem unresponsive at first. The break of dawn is also significant because it is the point where intention can be set before motion begins. Once the day gains momentum, reactions multiply, phone calls come in, decisions demand attention, and pressure increases. Authority is harder to establish once the system is already moving. This is why those who pray early with understanding often appear composed later in the day. They are not calm because nothing is happening. They are calm because authority was already established before activity began. Understanding also protects prayer from superstition. Without understanding, early prayer can become ritualistic, done out of fear or habit. But when understanding is present, the believer knows why they are praying early, what they are addressing, and what outcomes they are enforcing. This knowledge sharpens focus and prevents wasted spiritual energy. Spiritual authority is recognized in the spirit realm before it is visible in the natural. When prayer meets understanding at dawn, something shifts invisibly first. Resistance weakens, paths open, and favor is arranged long before results appear. Many people only judge authority by visible outcomes, but true authority begins with invisible alignment. Dawn prayer with understanding establishes that alignment consistently. This is why some believers seem to move through life with unusual precision. They are not lucky, and they are not exempt from challenges. They simply understand how to engage God early and correctly. Their mornings are not noisy, they are intentional. Their prayers are not desperate, they are informed. When understanding governs prayer at the break of dawn, the believer is no longer trying to survive the day. They are positioned to steward it. Authority becomes natural, not forced. Confidence replaces anxiety. Direction replaces confusion. And then the day begins to cooperate because it has already recognized a voice that speaks with legitimacy. The words spoken only carry unusual power because they enter the day while it is still forming. In the spirit realm, timing affects authority, and the earlier a word is released, the deeper it settles into the foundations of events. Before situations mature, before people's decisions crystallize, and before systems lock into motion, the spoken word can intercept, redirect, or override agendas that were already planned in darkness. This is why early speech is not casual speech, it is formative speech. Satanic agendas rarely announce themselves openly. They operate through subtle suggestions, delays, distractions, and emotional pressures. These agendas often rely on ignorance and lateness. When a believer waits until trouble becomes visible before speaking, the battle has already moved into a more difficult phase. But when words are released early, they confront plans at the planning stage, not at the execution stage. In spiritual warfare, interception is always more effective than reaction. The reason words can override limitations is because limitations are sustained by agreements. Many barriers persist not because they are strong, but because they are unchallenged. When a person wakes up and immediately aligns their speech with fear, doubt, or complaint, they unknowingly strengthen those limitations. But when they speak divine truth early, They withdraw permission from limiting forces. The day then unfolds under a different authority. Early words also shape perception. Before the mind begins to process data from the environment, spoken declarations can set an internal filter. This filter determines how information is interpreted. Two people can face the same challenge, but the one who spoke faith early interprets it as manageable, while the one who spoke nothing or spoke fear interprets it as overwhelming. The challenge did not change. The internal authority did. Darkness depends heavily on timing, delayed prayer, delayed awareness. And delayed authority, give it room to operate. This is why early declarations are dangerous to demonic strategy. They announce that the day is already claimed, that territory is already occupied, and that certain outcomes are forbidden. Their spiritual forces respect authority that is established early because it reflects order. Disorder is where they thrive. Human limitations also bow to early words. Fatigue, lack of resources, emotional weakness, and past experiences often attempt to define what a person can or cannot do in a day. But when someone speaks strength, clarity, and wisdom early, they rise above their natural state. This does not mean the body suddenly becomes superhuman. It means the spirit takes leadership. When the spirit leads, limitations no longer dictate outcomes. Words spoken early also engage angelic assistance. Angels respond to the voice of divine instruction, not human emotion. When a believer speaks God-aligned words at the start of the day, they activate assistance that begins working long before situations arise. Help is arranged ahead of need. Favor is positioned before requests are made. This is why some people walk into prepared environments without knowing why doors opened so easily. There is also a cumulative effect. Words spoken early consistently begin to build spiritual momentum. Over time, resistance weakens faster, recovery becomes quicker, and progress becomes steadier. This is not because life becomes easier, but because opposition is met with established authority instead of last-minute panic. Early words train the day to respond correctly. Careless early speech can be just as powerful in the negative direction. Complaints spoken in the morning poison motivation. Fear spoken early magnifies uncertainty. Self-doubt spoken early shrinks courage. Many people unknowingly sabotage their own day before breakfast. Then spend the rest of the day trying to fix what their words damaged. The enemy often does not need to attack aggressively when a person's own mouth has already cooperated. Overriding satanic agendas does not require knowing every plan of the enemy. It requires establishing a higher plan early. Light does not need to study darkness. It simply needs to shine. When divine truth is spoken early, darkness loses relevance. Plans collapse not because they were exposed, but because they were rendered illegal. Words spoken early do not force God to act. They align the speaker with what God is already willing to do. This alignment creates boldness without arrogance and confidence without strain. The believer speaks knowing they are not alone, and that awareness alone carries authority. When early speech becomes intentional, mornings stop being rushed and start becoming strategic. The mouth becomes a tool of governance rather than a channel of emotion. The day begins under instruction instead of uncertainty. And invisible resistance weakens long before visible challenges appear. Fellowship with God in the morning is not primarily about asking for things. It is about alignment. Alignment means placing the spirit in the correct position before engaging the demands of the world. Every day carries pressure opinions, expectations, and emotional triggers. If the inner man is not aligned early, these external forces begin to dictate reactions. Morning fellowship ensures that the spirit takes leadership before the soul and body are overwhelmed by stimuli. The world is loud, and its noise is not only audible but psychological and emotional. Conversations, notifications, responsibilities, and unresolved issues all compete for attention. When a person steps into this noise without first anchoring themselves in God, their inner world becomes fragmented. Fellowship in the morning restores order. It quiets unnecessary voices and amplifies the voice that brings clarity. That this is why those who prioritize morning fellowship often appear composed, even in stressful environments. Their calm is not avoidance, it is alignment. Alignment in the morning affects decision making throughout the day. Calm. Decisions are rarely made in isolation. They are influenced by emotional posture. When the spirit is misaligned, decisions are driven by fear, urgency, or people pleasing. But when fellowship has aligned the heart with God, their decisions flow from wisdom rather than pressure. This is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is simply knowing when to speak, when to stay silent, when to move, and when to wait. Morning fellowship also recalibrates identity. The world constantly attempts to define a person by performance, failure, success, or comparison. Without intentional alignment, these definitions slip into the heart unnoticed. Fellowship reminds the believer who they are before they are told who to be. It restores confidence without arrogance and humility without insecurity. Identity clarity is a powerful defense against temptation, discouragement, and distraction. Another effect of early fellowship is emotional regulation. Emotions are not evil, but when they lead, they distort perception. Anxiety magnifies threats, anger narrows vision, and excitement can override caution. The fellowship does not remove emotions, it puts them in their proper place. The believer begins the day emotionally submitted rather than emotionally driven. This inner order reduces unnecessary conflict and regret later. Fellowship also sensitizes the spirit. Sensitivity is the ability to perceive subtle shifts, warnings, and opportunities. Many mistakes are not the result of rebellion but dullness. When the spirit is not aligned, discernment weakens. Morning fellowship sharpens perception before the day introduces complexity. This sensitivity allows a person to avoid traps they cannot explain and recognize opportunities they did not plan for. Alignment with God in the morning changes how one engages the world. Work becomes stewardship rather than survival. Conversations become purposeful rather than draining. Challenges are faced with awareness rather than panic. This does not mean every interaction is easy, but it means the believer is internally governed. External chaos loses its power to dictate internal state. Without morning fellowship, many believers attempt to reconnect with God only after the day has exhausted them. By then, the spirit is tired, the mind is cluttered, and emotions are reactive. Prayer becomes heavy instead of fluid. Fellowship becomes a recovery tool instead of a leadership tool. Morning alignment prevents this cycle by placing God at the beginning, not as an emergency response. Consistency in this practice deepens intimacy. God becomes familiar, not distant. His presence is recognized quickly, not after long effort. This familiarity builds trust, and trust reduces striving. The believer no longer tries to impress God with activity. They rest in alignment and move from instruction. Aligning the spirit before engaging the world is an act of wisdom, not weakness. It acknowledges that human strength is limited and that clarity is more valuable than speed. Many people rush into their day and spend hours fixing what could have been avoided with minutes of alignment. The fellowship governs the morning. The world is no longer the first voice heard or the strongest influence felt. The spirit stands upright before pressure arrives. The believer enters the day led, not pushed, anchored, not scattered, and internally ordered before external demands begin. Consistency in commanding the morning is what transforms a powerful idea into a governing lifestyle. Occasional spiritual actions produce occasional results, but repeated spiritual discipline builds structure in the spirit. When a believer commands the morning daily, they are not just influencing individual days. They are training their inner man to recognize authority, timing, and order over time. The spirit learns how to take leadership without struggle. Spiritual sensitivity is not accidental. It is cultivated through repeated exposure to God's presence and repeated obedience to spiritual rhythms. The morning, when consistently claimed, becomes the classroom where the spirit is trained. At first, commanding the morning may feel mechanical or forced, but persistence refines perception. Gradually, the believer begins to sense subtle impressions, inner warnings, and quiet directions that were previously missed. Dominion grows through familiarity. When a person regularly speaks with authority in the morning, their confidence in spiritual matters increases. This confidence is not arrogance, it is assurance rooted in experience. They have seen days shift, pressures reduce, and clarity increase. These experiences reinforce faith, making spiritual authority feel natural rather than intimidating. Consistency also weakens resistance. Many spiritual battles are prolonged, not because the opposition is strong, but because authority is inconsistent. Darkness adapts to inconsistency. When prayer and declarations are sporadic, resistance waits for gaps. But when authority is exercised daily, opposition loses timing advantage. The environment begins to recognize a pattern and adjusts accordingly. Commanding the morning daily creates spiritual momentum. Momentum is the force that makes progress easier over time. At first, effort feels heavy, but as momentum builds, movement becomes smoother. The believer finds it easier to pray, easier to focus, and easier to discern. Spiritual disciplines stop feeling like obligations and start feeling like alignment. Consistency also stabilizes emotions. Emotional swings often result from spiritual irregularity. When the spirit is neglected, emotions overcompensate. But daily morning alignment creates emotional balance. The believer becomes less reactive and more responsive. Situations that once triggered anxiety or anger lose their grip because the spirit has been strengthened through routine. Dominion is sustained through order. Order is established through repetition, just as the body responds to daily exercise by becoming stronger. The spirit responds to daily authority by becoming sharper. Skipping mornings weakens this order, not immediately, but gradually. The believer may not notice the decline until confusion increases and clarity decreases. Consistent morning authority also changes how a believer relates to time. Time stops feeling like an enemy and starts feeling like a resource. The day feels longer, not because hours increase, but because distractions decrease. Focus improves and tasks are completed with less strain. This is a practical fruit of spiritual order. Over time, commanding the morning produces discernment that cannot be taught easily. The believer begins to recognize patterns, Calm cycles and spiritual atmospheres. They sense when something is out of order and respond quickly. This discernment is the fruit of repeated alignment, not sudden revelation. Consistency also produces humility. As the believer sees how much difference alignment makes, they become more dependent on God, not less. They realize that success without alignment is fragile. This awareness keeps pride in check and maintains spiritual health. Dominion built through consistency is quiet but firm. There is no need to prove authority when it is already established. The believer walks into environments and influences them without striving. Peace precedes them, clarity follows them, and favor accompanies their actions. Commanding the morning daily does not remove challenges, but it changes posture. The believer stops fighting life and starts stewarding it. Sensitivity increases, authority matures, and the spirit remains alert. Through consistency, what once required effort becomes instinct. Prayer becomes the first response, not the last option. Authority becomes a habit, not a struggle. The morning becomes a throne room rather than a battlefield. And dominion becomes a lived reality rather than a theoretical belief. In summary, commanding your morning with God is not a ritual reserved for the spiritually elite. It is a divine strategy for living with intention, clarity, and authority. The morning is where the unseen foundations of the day are laid, where voices contend for influence, and where alignment determines outcomes. When a believer understands this and responds deliberately, their life stops feeling accidental and begins to reflect purpose. By speaking early, aligning deeply, and remaining consistent, the believer learns to lead time instead of chasing it. Spiritual authority is no longer reactive but established. No longer emotional but informed. The day begins under divine order, not human pressure. Therein challenges lose their power to confuse or overwhelm. What once required struggle begins to flow because the Spirit has taken its rightful place. This practice does not promise a life without resistance, but it guarantees a posture of dominion. When the morning is claimed, the day cooperates. When alignment is secured, wisdom follows. And when consistency is maintained, sensitivity and authority mature naturally. Commanding your morning with God ultimately means living from the inside out, where heaven is consulted first. The Spirit leads boldly, and each day unfolds under purpose rather than chance.